Kerry, Raleigh, Tipton with the Law Office of Kerry, Raleigh, Tipton. I'm located in Tampa, but I'm licensed to practice law throughout Florida and the state of Ohio. My firm helps businesses and business owners manage and resolve their legal needs. As part of that, I help businesses with their employment law matters, which brings me to the topic we're going to talk about today, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. The Fair Labor Standards Act is a federal law that places responsibilities on employers in connection with their minimum wages, their overtime wages, youth labor, and record keeping. Today we're talking mostly about the overtime issues, which in some aspects is very simple, and I think a lot of people get it. If a worker works more than 40 hours within one work week, they are entitled to time and 1/2 rate of time for every hour worked in excess of 40, unless they're exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. And under that law, if the employer fails to pay them the overtime wages, the employee is entitled to recover their unpaid overtime, an equal amount in liquidated damages, plus their attorney's fees. And liability under the Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't just rest on the business, but liability also on the individual who had responsibility in overseeing the time and pay practices for that employee. So a lot of times you'll see these lawsuits are filed. They're not just being filed against the company, but the owner of the company as well. And so that is something that business owners really need to pay attention to. Because every once in a while you'll hear someone say, and I don't hear this a lot, but you do hear someone say, you know what, I think I own this business. If an employee wants to come after my business, you know what, I can just close the business and not worry about it and start over again. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, you can't do that because as the owner of the business, you could be personally liable for it as well. And it is a very popular law in that employees bring it because they want to get paid their unpaid overtime, because there's a because they're entitled to their attorney's fees. Attorneys like to bring these claims on behalf of the employees. So that's why I'm sure a lot of people out there who are watching this video have seen commercials or billboards advertising, hey, have you worked overtime? Do you want to get paid your full wages? That's why those commercials are out there, because because under the law, the lawyers can get recovery for their attorney's fees, and really the employees do need to get paid what they're entitled to under the law. So when you're looking at the Fair Labor Standards Act, the first questions that employers should be asking is my business covered? Do I have to follow and comply with this law? And then if I do, which one of my employees are entitled to be paid overtime? So with the first question, in looking at whether or not your business is covered under the law, there are two criteria in which it's covered. One is called enterprise coverage. If your business has at least 2 employees and has gross revenues of $500,000 a year, your whole business is covered and every employee for your business is covered. They're entitled to overtime pay if they are non-exempt. If they're exempt, they're not entitled to overtime pay. I'm going to talk about exemption issues in a second. Even if your business isn't covered under the enterprise coverage, meaning you don't have 2 employees or you didn't have $500,000 in gross revenues, a worker of yours can still be covered and entitled to overtime pay if they're non-exempt if they themselves engage in interstate commerce. It's very easy to engage in interstate commerce. If they process credit card payments, if they use telephone lines or they call someone from another state, if they order products from another state, then they are engaged in interstate commerce and they're covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act. In fact, over 130 million workers are covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and it's safe to say that most employers and most workers are covered under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So the next question is, you just considered and you looked at, is my business covered under the Act? And say for your business the answer is yes. Then the next step is to look at which of my employees are entitled to overtime pay. And that's when we're going to go into, are they exempt or non-exempt? If there's only certain categories of exemption, not every employee falls into an exemption. And the most common exemptions are what's considered the white-collar exemptions. They're your executive, administrative, and professional exemptions. Each one of those, the worker needs to be paid a salary of at least $455 a week. That's just one test. That salary must be a bona fide salary, meaning that there cannot be deductions for quality or quantity of work. There are certain instances where you can make a deduction from pay, but overall you cannot make a deduction of pay from an exempt employee's salary without losing the exemption status. That's the second check. Next, you have to look at their specific duties and responsibilities. Each of those exemptions that I said, the executive, administrative, and professional, all have their own listing of different responsibilities that the individual must do as part of their work. For instance, the executive exemption, in addition to being paid a salary of $455 a week, in addition to that salary not having deductions for quantity or quality of work, they must supervise at least 2 employees, be involved in management decisions and responsibilities of the company, and they must have hiring and firing authority. And if they don't hire and fire themselves, their recommendations must be considered by the person that does hire and fire. If they don't have these primary duties, even if they're paid a salary, they don't fall within that exemption. The administrative and professional exemptions have similar duties that the employer or worker must perform as part of their job. I'm not going to list the specific duties as part of this talk, but when you're at home or if you're looking at this, you're reviewing this from your office, you want to look at your employees. You can go to my website and see what the specific primary duties and responsibilities are for each of the exemptions. You can go to the Department of Labor website. Some other common exemptions would include the outside sales employee, some computer related positions are exempt, and then there is the highly compensated employee exemption, and some retail commission sales positions are also exempt. As with the executive exemption, each one has criteria in terms of the pay and the specific duties of how the employee actually performs their job. If they don't fall into a specific exemption, then the employee is considered non-exempt. If they are non-exempt, they are entitled to get paid overtime for every hour worked in excess of 40 hours within a work week.